Iran never saw it coming. There were no warnings, no intercepted signals, no alarms screaming across radar screens, just silence. And then, hours later, the realization hit US. B-2 stealth bombers had already entered the Middle East, not for show, not for training, but for a reason Tehran wasn't supposed to understand until it was too late. This wasn't a routine deployment. The B-2 Spirit doesn't move unless the message matters. Designed to bypass radar, built to strike without warning, capable of carrying weapons that redefine deterrence. When B-2s appear, it means the US wants someone to think carefully about their next move. And this time, that someone was Iran. Most headlines asked what happened. The real question was why now? Because the timing wasn't random. Behind closed doors, tensions had been rising. Threats were being tested. Red lines were quietly approached. The B-2 flight wasn't a reaction, it was a preemptive reminder. The operation began far from the Middle East, inside heavily secured US bases. Crews prepared aircraft designed for missions that can last more than 40 hours without landing. No press access, no dramatic rollout, just precision. Once airborne, the bombers disappeared not from sight, but from detection itself. To Iranian radar operators, the sky looked empty. That was the first failure. As the B-2s approached the region, nothing changed on Iranian screens. No targets, no tracks, no warning. Iran's air defense doctrine depends on early detection, but stealth doesn't challenge defenses. It makes them irrelevant. By the time Iranian command structures realized something was wrong, the mission had already reached its critical phase. There was no explosion, no crater, no smoke. Just intelligence reports arriving after the fact, flight patterns analyzed too late, foreign confirmations leaking quietly, a realization spreading through command rooms. If this had been a real strike, it would already be over. That truth hit harder than any bomb. This flight wasn't about destruction, it was about exposure. Exposing blind spots, overconfidence, false security. The US wasn't testing Iran's weapons. It was testing Iran's assumptions, and every single one of them failed. For years, Iran had built its deterrence on visibility. If we see it, we can stop it. The B-2 shattered that belief. Now every future decision carried a new fear. What if we don't see the next one either? That's not military pressure, that's psychological dominance. Allies noticed, rivals noticed, defense ministries across the Middle East quietly reviewed their own capabilities and reached the same uncomfortable conclusion. If Iran couldn't track them, who could? The balance of power hadn't shifted overnight, it had been revealed. Iran now faced two terrible options. Respond and risk escalation, it couldn't control. Stay silent and confirm its vulnerability. Neither choice restored deterrence. And that's when silence becomes the loudest admission of all. This mission didn't start a war, but it changed the rules. From this moment forward, Iran had to assume something new. The sky might already be occupied, even when it looks empty. The bombers returned without firing a single weapon, but something far more valuable had been deployed. Doubt, fear, uncertainty. And if this was only a message, then the next flight may not be. First reaction in Tehran wasn't rage, it was silence. A dangerous, heavy silence, the kind that follows a realization no one wants to say out loud. Because once the shock faded, a darker understanding took its place. This mission hadn't been accidental. It hadn't been symbolic, and it hadn't been rushed. It had been calculated, which meant it was planned long before Iran realized it was being watched. Within hours, senior commanders from Iran's air defense, aerospace forces, and intelligence branches were summoned behind closed doors. No cameras, no press statements, no slogans. Just data radar logs were pulled. Sensor timelines were reconstructed. Communication delays were measured down to the second. And the conclusion was brutal. There was no moment where Iran almost detected the bombers. They were never close, they were never seen at all. For a doctrine built on layered detection, that discovery was catastrophic. A strike destroys targets. This mission destroyed confidence. Iran could rebuild air defenses. It could replace hardware. It could move assets underground. But it couldn't erase the fact that something had crossed its airspace or operational envelope without permission, detection, or resistance. And once that happens, deterrence changes forever, because deterrence only works when both sides believe escalation is predictable. This mission proved it wasn't. Despite the headlines, Iran wasn't the only audience. Not even the main one. This flight spoke directly to Regional rivals calculating red lines, allies questioning U.S. commitment, global powers watching American reach military planners, wondering if old assumptions still applied. This wasn't about one country, it was about reasserting control over uncertainty itself. The timing wasn't random. Behind the scenes, intelligence assessments had been growing darker. Escalatory rhetoric, proxy movements, weapons transfers, threshold behavior. Washington didn't want to respond after a provocation. It wanted to act before Iran believed it could act freely. The B-2 mission wasn't reactive, it was preemptive deterrence without the noise. People often misunderstand stealth. They think it's about surprise attacks. It's not. Stealth is about removing choices from the opponent. When Iran realized it couldn't see the aircraft, it also realized something else. It couldn't time a response. It couldn't calibrate escalation. It couldn't control the narrative. Every option became a gamble, and governments don't like gambling with survival. Military weakness can be managed. Political pride is harder. Iran's leadership had spent years projecting defiance not just outward, but inward, to its population, to its allies, to its own commanders. Now it faced a dilemma it couldn't publicly admit. If it did nothing, it looked exposed. If it did something, it risked triggering exactly what the mission warned against. This is where miscalculations are born. Observers expected a response. Missiles, drone launches, aggressive maneuvers. None came. And that absence wasn't weakness, it was recognition. Recognition that escalation under these conditions wouldn't be controlled by Tehran. It would be controlled by whoever already owned the sky. And that reality forced restraint whether Iran wanted it or not. Iran still had tools, indirect ones, regional proxies, cyber operations, maritime pressure, but even those options carried risk. Because once stealth aircraft enter the equation, attribution becomes irrelevant. Any escalation, anywhere, could be answered everywhere else. That uncertainty paralyzes planners, and paralysis is exactly what deterrence aims to create. Across the Middle East, quiet recalculations were underway. Defense ministries replayed the mission in silence. If Iran couldn't detect the aircraft, could anyone? Old assumptions about airspace control, early warning, and escalation ladders began to crack. The conclusion was uncomfortable. The region hadn't suddenly become less stable, it had become less predictable. In Moscow and Beijing, analysts didn't issue dramatic statements. They did something far more serious. They studied flight profiles, mission duration, operational silence, refueling patterns, because the implications extended far beyond the Middle East. If stealth could neutralize deterrence here, it could do so elsewhere. And that realization lingered. Notably, Washington didn't celebrate. There were no victory speeches, no warnings, no red line declarations. That silence was intentional because explaining the mission would weaken it. Ambiguity was the weapon, and ambiguity only works when it's preserved. Before the mission, Iran believed escalation followed a ladder, step-by-step action, response, counter-response. After the mission, that ladder disappeared. Because when your opponent can bypass the early steps, escalation becomes asymmetric. And asymmetric escalation favors the side with reach, technology, and patience, not the side reacting under pressure. From this point forward, every Iranian decision must account for a new variable. What might already be overhead? That question changes behavior. It slows decision-making, it limits boldness, it forces caution where defiance once lived. And that, more than any strike, achieves strategic objectives. History shows the most dangerous moment isn't the show of force, it's what follows. When leaders feel exposed, when credibility feels threatened, when internal pressure demands a response. That's when mistakes happen. And that's why this mission may echo far longer than the flight itself. No one knows if another flight is planned. That uncertainty is the point, because deterrence works best when the opponent must assume the worst without proof. The B-2 didn't just enter the Middle East, it entered Iran's decision-making process, and once that happens, every move becomes heavier. No missile was fired, no target was hit, no life was lost. Yet the message was unmistakable. Some power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't posture, it doesn't threaten. It simply demonstrates what it can do quietly and leaves others to imagine the rest. The skies over the Middle East look calm again. Radar screens glow, air defenses stand ready. Nothing appears out of place. But that's the most unsettling part because Iran now knows something it can never unlearn. The sky can be occupied, even when it looks empty. And if this mission was only a reminder, the next one may not end without consequences.